I'm going to try something a little bit ambitious here, and we're running a hybrid panel. So yeah, it's a first for me. I think maybe a first for most of us, actually, possibly. But I'm really pleased to welcome. So we have. Firstly, Amy Dickens is joining us from Berlin, so newly relocated to Berlin there. And Dan Clark is, well, you're all the way, where are you based now, Dan? You moved recently, didn't you?
I'm in Milwaukee in Wisconsin.
Milwaukee,
and,
yeah.
Got a heavy snow flurry.
Really?
Just saying.
Okay.
So Winter Wonderland.
Fantastic. And then in person, we have Tim Adnett and Adil Ganti from Native Instruments. So at the last moment, they dropped everything and said that they'll come and take part in our panel. So I really appreciate that. And then we have my good friend Mary Alice here, who is a bit of a connecting block between all of us. So yeah, we're going to have a bit of a chat, I guess, about accessibility, usability, tech, and hopefully answer a few questions from you guys in the audience and online as well. But perhaps we could start with you, Mary Alice. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your thoughts on music technology accessibility and perhaps the role of the music technology product industry?
Yes, okay. Creative United's connection or involvement in the music sector started out really around the provision of musical instruments, the affordability of musical instruments. And for many years we ran a program called Take It Away and actually excluded music technology. Interestingly, at the beginning we said, well, that's not an instrument. So you can't have technology, you have to be buying something that's got strings or you blow into, or kind of easily understood as an instrument. We weren't exactly ahead of the curve on that one, and we were operating that scheme through a network of musical instrument retailers. And over the years, of course, as my knowledge of the industry has developed and I began to make connections with people for whom music technology was central to their music practice and not an add-on and not an adjunct to, but it was, absolutely at the core of their music production. I'm pleased to say at some point along the way we went, no, hang on a minute, people make music in lots of different ways. We've got to broaden this out. We've got to respond to the way in which people want to create music, and then we broaden the remit of the Take It Away scheme. And then some of you may have heard this story before. I do use it a lot in explaining how we've ended up here. I had a chance conversation with someone who said to me, well, it's great that you're providing access to musical instruments in an affordable way, but what if the musical instrument itself is the barrier to participation? Have you thought about that? No. And so having got over the is technology an instrument question, I was then faced with the is the musical instrument the barrier question, at which point we began to look in some detail at musical instrument design and the way in which technology can be an enabling element of music making. And over the years, as I said, I don't come from a music background or a music tech background, and so it's still an industry shrouded in mystery for me. And today I've learned a lot. But the point is that technology has opened up the world in so many different ways. It is a fantastic tool. It's a tool that we can use to allow everyone to participate, to find their way through the industry, to develop their sound, to produce and share what they've created. And so we now see it as absolutely central. And in the music education sector, part of what I do is a publicly funded organisation. We focused a lot on people's first encounter with music making. So in primary schools, what is the first experience that you are given of learning to play or learning to create sound? And that is an area, often strangely, the education sector is the slowest to recognise change in, changes in approaches to learning. I mean, they should be the first to adopt, but often, things are slow. And so we found within the music education sector, in a way, they're still perpetuating this notion that an instrument has to have strings or you blow into it, and they're not really adopting technology in the way that they could be, and which for this generation, if not last generation, the use of technology is the thing that creates the excitement and the engagement. That's the way in. And so we're really poised, I think, at a moment now when things could really fundamentally change if the education sector can kind of recognize the power of what is contained within the technology that is now completely available on the market. What we've looked at today is quite specialist, but it's not that far off being completely mainstream, accessible, and delivering a totally different educational experience. So that's really, I feel we're on the point of something really significant here, and I'm excited to see how we might be able to work with industry, with educators, with musicians to just kind of get us over the line.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Marie-Alice. And there's so many strands to what you said there. It's about, I suppose, the definition of what a musical instrument is, and changing paradigms with music technology. But then also, sort of educational aspects of learning a musical instrument. And it's something that has come up quite a lot today, that sort of a barrier to learning, really, I guess. So talking about sort of new paradigms, new musical instruments, I'd like to just ask Amy about her perspective on accessibility, working with Ableton, and particularly, something I'd be interested in is, do you feel that working with new paradigms of musical interactions, as to say, like working with Ableton Push, gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of defining what it is for an instrument to be accessible? I hope that's not too long a question.
Well, hopefully you can all hear me okay.
We can, yeah.
Great, fantastic. Well, hello. So to pick up on your question, I'm well placed to talk about technology as an instrument and accessible instruments because I just happened to have finished my PhD in accessible digital musical instruments.
Excellent.
And the question of what can be an instrument is ever expanding.
Mm-hmm.
And in research and in artistic practice, you see some really amazing devices coming out of even ordinary everyday items that have been embedded with some sort of technology to make them usable and playable. And, I think when it comes to artistic practice and music, anything could be an instrument. Yes. Literally anything. In fact, we had Dame Evelyn was talking at a conference I ran a few weeks ago, and she has even uploaded a video of playing her kitchen sink as a percussionist. And I think that's a really nice thing to have, that kind of open attitude. Technology as an enabler it can go both ways, actually. Technology can take away a lot of the physical reactions and interactions that we expect to have with instruments. And sometimes that lack of feedback can actually make them more inaccessible. And also the tendency for electronic musicians to go after an aesthetic that is it looks a certain way, and it features mainly just, a sleek black aesthetic and colorful LEDs. And those things aren't necessarily perceivable by everyone. So we kind of have been bound a bit by the way that music technology has established its cool factor, and also how the technology itself can actually lend itself to being more accessible. So, but yeah, technology has been a really great enabler in some of the spaces that I've worked in. I've actually worked in a lot of SEND school educational environments, and technology gets adopted quite quickly there because it's a familiar thing that people are using for their communication and for other reasons, and then it becomes a lot easier to adopt something like an iPad with an app on it that also helps produce music. And so, yeah, that's something that has been really interesting to see, and to see a technology adopted more quickly than in a traditional educational setting, I would say. And then I guess now that I'm working with Ableton, we are known for being kind of at the heart of electronic musicianship, and that's something that is something that's been known across the industry, but we're also very aware now that a lot of what we've been doing to date hasn't been accessible. And so we're at the start of that journey, really, and looking into how to make the things that we've already got existing out there more accessible, and how to make sure accessibility is embedded in what we do going forward. So, and that's where we're at with that, and hopefully, we've got some great people to learn from. In fact, Tim and Adil being on the panel today, we've got a lot to learn from what's been done with native. There's been stuff happening at Focusrite as well with Dan. So it's always been it's great to be able to look at other people's experiences and see that the whole industry is moving towards being more accessible.
Thanks, Amy. That's a great segue to talk to Tim and Adil. Do you have any? I mean, you've been on this path for some time now with your NKS range, and obviously Machina. It's big news that that's now screen reader compatible, which is fantastic. Maybe could I ask you to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've encountered along that road, and what advice you might give to any other sort of companies that are looking to improve the accessibility of their products?
Sure. I mean, I can go first perhaps, and then Adil can pick up on his experience. So I think, if we think about the challenges behind it, it's probably a familiar story to all of us, to be honest, which is getting started. Actually, that's the biggest thing. You're at a company, NI at the time was quite a bit smaller than it is today, but still quite a sizable company. And my role at the time was a product designer and then a product manager. So, it was mentioned earlier by Chi, leadership sets resourcing, so you have to kind of find a way through. And for that, for us, it was basically this whole hack day thing that so many companies do that was the catalyst for this. So myself and one of my colleagues just started doing it from this slightly crazy idea, proved it worked, and then it was very much kind of grassroots, evenings, weekends, that kind of project. And I think the challenge then becomes, how do you go from there to actually having something to release? Right. And persuade essentially the management of the company that this is, this isn't going to make us look stupid in the end, because we haven't messed it up, we hope. And of course, to do that, that's when challenge starts to become something very wonderful, which is working with the community. And we had so much support. Andre Louis, who's here, was the very first person, in fact, in the world outside of native to use the keyboard, give us some feedback, help us to make some progress. We also spoke to Scott, who's here, to Jason, who's here. I'll come and say hi to you guys later for sure. So it's nice to see so many familiar faces in this room in that regard. But yeah, as I say, the challenge then is essentially going from that place. Once you get it released, how do you make it part of the culture of the company? Yeah. So it's not isolated, because I mean, speaking openly, I knew that certain people in the company would be saying, yeah, but now we have to do this. It's like, well, yeah, you do. So please do it. So I think a lot of it is those kinds of challenges. I mean, obviously my role's changed. I'm a product director now. So it's a bit more abstraction, which of course I miss doing it, but it's a bit more of an abstraction layer. Mm-hmm. But it means you can steer more of these things and start to build that culture. So still a way to go. There's no question. But it's certainly a much more formal thing now for us. And the challenge now is building that culture into, we're now Soundwide, working with Isotope, Soundstacks, Brainworks, Plugin Alliance, is actually expanding that now beyond NI and Isotope especially, and into the other products.
Fantastic, thanks Tim. And Adil, would you like to talk a little bit about your side, which presumably is more on sort of Machina and the accessibility of that. But
we've actually had a huge amount of overlap in terms of what we've done over the years. Basically, take Tim, subtract 1 or 2 years, and you get me.
Okay.
So I mean, kind of continuing with that theme, Tim's nicely summarised the kind of the challenges of the early points, the starting point, if you will. So we don't really understand what it is we're trying to achieve at this point. We don't really understand what the customer wants. We don't really understand how it's going to go. This is kind of circa 2015, 2016 era. So all of those challenges overcome, weekends, evenings, convincing management, and so on and so forth. And we get to the release, and it's great, and everyone loves it. Now what do we do? So at this point, there's a bit more awareness inside the company. There's 3 or 4 people who understand what it is we're trying to do rather than 1 or 2. There's development team who actually understands the customer. The customers have come in, they've met the customers. We've seen firsthand how impactful this can be. We've seen how this can completely change the life of certain musicians, certain customers. We've seen the impact of NKS and the reach. Great, we want to do this for other products. How? So that's when a kind of a real sort of rude awakening comes in. And I mean, this is Amy's lesson. This is something that Amy says time and time again. It's easier to make products accessible from the very beginning than it is to retrofit accessibility in. Round of applause for Amy.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that really cannot ring truer, because I think for a lot of our products, these are products that have been around for quite some time. They've got customer bases that have, been using the product for 5, 10, in some cases 15 or even 20 years. We are precious about our tech stacks, shall we say. You can't just rip away 50% of the application and stick 50% of new stuff in there, even if that would make tons of sense in certain ways because of the amount that we would leave behind in doing so. And oftentimes those are the sorts of challenges we face when it comes to, for example, making Machina or making Contact accessible from the get-go. So we need to think of new creative ways of doing so. For that, I'll plug the presentation that Steve did with Jay yesterday at the accessibility booth at ADC. He gave a really lovely summary of how we've broken this down technically, how we've kind of come up with a really creative way of both honouring everything that's there today whilst adding a completely new layer of accessibility on top. I won't attempt to do justice to it because code, and I don't know anything about code, but trust me. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adil. And Dan, so I'm aware that Focusrite has had their accessibility steering committee running for some time now, and you're building momentum, really, I guess. And do you have any tips as to ways in which that momentum can be sustained within a business environment, in terms of the momentum of accessibility, I guess, really?
Great question. And at first, I must say hello to Alex from everyone at Focusrite. Everyone sends their kind regards. So if you didn't know, Alex used to work at Focusrite. He was part of the product design team. And this event is great. I'm so glad to be here. I think really, I'm sure it's been talked about today. Getting accessibility into pre-existing products and workflows is something that you have to work out over time, and it's about encouraging that engagement with all members of a business. Obviously, senior stakeholders are an important part of that. You want them to be brought in because ultimately they have a say on where we spend our time and our money. But I think one of the most important things is engaging with all elements of the business. So the accessibility steering group that we have at Focusrite, there's 4 or 5 of us who are in a leadership position in that group, for want of a better term. But in terms of like our internal channels, I think there's 40 people or so in the business who are just actively engaged on our Microsoft Teams channel talking about accessibility. And that's all parts of the business. It's not just designers or engineers, it's QA, it's beta testers, it's people in sales and marketing. And I think that's really the thing about maintaining momentum is spreading the conversation so that it's not just 1 or 2 people talking about it. It's many people talking about it. Some talk about it a lot. Some of them don't talk about it as much. But once it's something that people are thinking about and talking about, it increases the possibility for someone to come at any point in any part of the business and be like, oh, is that accessible? And raise that conversation. I think it was just mentioned, about Amy's wisdom about it's fair to make things accessible from the start. I mean, that is 100% true. Going back and undoing work to make something accessible is difficult. But what we've been working hard at is, making accessibility more of what the lingo is, the definition of done. When you're working on something, you say, hey, this piece of software needs a button to turn something on or off. The definition of done is that the button does the thing and it doesn't break anything. But also now we're working to say, well, that button also has to be screen reader compatible. So it's just inherently something that you're building, and it just becomes the norm. And I think that's how you increase momentum over time.
Fantastic, thanks. Thanks, Dan. I'm really keen to kind of open up the floor to questions, really, from you guys. So does anyone have anything they'd like to ask of any of the panelists today at all? Yes, Scott, let me bring the microphone over to you. There we go.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for putting this on. Right, it's going to sound like I'm complaining to start with, right? But bear with me because there is a question at the end of it. So I just want to pick up on what Dan was saying about broadening the scope of people that are talking about accessibility, particularly at design stages, early stages of product. And this is the bit that's going to sound like a complaint, but I don't mean it to be. If you come to one of these panels, you can pretty much predict who's going to be there at the moment. So I'm not criticizing Focusrite at all, but like Focusrite are going to be there, for example. But how do we get it? How do we get smaller companies with less market penetration involved that are doing stuff around accessibility that is really good, and like people just don't know about it? And the same question for open source products as well. How do we broaden the scope of these panels and get those folks involved, because they've got perspective to contribute. In a lot of cases, open source, I can think of a bunch of cases where open source is 9 months to a year ahead in terms of like shipping accessible product, and yet they don't have a presence at most of these events. So how does that change? Has anyone got any thoughts on it?
Thanks so much, Scott. Would anyone like to have a go at answering that?
I have some thoughts.
Go ahead, Amy.
And I also have some construction noise, maybe, if you might have heard that. I think Scott's really right in that industry is not intersecting with enough of these communities at the moment. And I think part of that is because of expectations of where we're going to find the people to talk about these things with. A lot of industry looks to its own forums, or might look to common places like Reddit or other big forums where people talk about music and music technology. And what I've traditionally found is those places aren't the places that you'll find some of the disability community. So they'll be on mailing lists or WhatsApp groups or in open source contributions. And it's a little bit like it's just been that people have been kind of looking in the wrong places because of previous assumptions. And I think it's starting to change. I'm definitely seeing that through the research that we've been doing at Ableton. People are starting to understand this landscape a little bit more. But to get more people involved, I think we just need to have more connections with the communities. And it's something that I'm open to. I'm entirely open to anybody having my email address and passing me to anybody and trying to get involved in these things. But yeah, I think it's just a little bit like we've been working in parallel and nobody's made that bridge yet. And so what we'd like to do is try and make that bridge. I don't think anybody's opposed to that. It's just it historically has been a little bit that nobody has quite made it yet.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I think that's an important point. And I guess maybe that's sort of one of the strengths, I guess, with the open source communities. I mean, we've seen some very effective tools which have seen longevity as well, really, you know, without any sort of capital necessarily invested in them, you know, sort of lots of volunteer efforts. And I guess it would be quite interesting to sort of, I guess the benefit of open source is this kind of ethos of sharing knowledge, of sharing approaches to design. And do you see a degree of cross-pollination between different companies in that regard, or do you have your own design philosophies when it comes to accessibility? Yeah, is there much crossover there?
I mean, I would say, in my experience, there is. I mean,
yeah.
certainly all of us have spoken to each other on many occasions about exactly this topic.
Yeah.
Inevitably, there are, you know, design departments are separate, and people have their own ideas about how to do things.
Yeah.
But what I would say, and it even adds to Scott's question, I think, and what Amy's saying about community, is that it's one of those topics where, you know, technically on some level, Novation and Native Instruments and Arturia compete, theoretically. Well, they do, I suppose, you know. Yet when it's come to this topic, it's not been a competitive topic. And I think that's a very healthy and a very good start to the whole process. So we've also, you know, talked to friends at Arturia, and, you know, as I say, we've all got to know each other, I think it's fair to say, through the topic of accessibility primarily. And actually, speaking to Scott's question, I think it's part, so, you know, it's good now because several companies talking together, we're here, that's great, that's a good step. I agree with you. I think there's tons of really exciting stuff happening in the, you know, in the open source space and smaller companies. And I think it's kind of the community is the connection point. And I think we also have a responsibility to actually elevate some of those voices as companies that are often invited to these events and people who are very involved in the topic. You know, that's certainly how probably a lot of us got involved in it. Myself through Ed Gray, who Chi Kim talked about earlier, you know, various other people. So I think that community connection, big plus one to what Amy said, is the way, but we also have to have a responsibility for kind of advocating for that too when we're approached. So it's good food for thought, that. Thanks, Scott.
Did you have something you wanted to add, Mariana?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say really that visibility is everything for small businesses. We've got to give them an opportunity to showcase what they've got. Work that's in development, work that's commercially available, and for Creative United, that's one of my main objectives, is to create a directory. We did produce 2 years ago the first ever guide to adaptive instruments and assistive equipment, which we published in partnership with Musicians Union and Norman's Music, to try and just get some visibility of the things we could find. It's really hard to find lists of stuff, you know, what is out there, and finding an up-to-date directory of product is step one. Giving visibility to smaller businesses who have good product that is relevant, and then making sure that people who are organising events like this one, like ADC, like other industry events and public-facing events, are giving them a platform to really share what they've done. Otherwise, you know, we will only, well, not only hear, but we'll tend to hear the leaders in the market leaders, because those are the most familiar. But a bit like the shift that I think a positive shift has happened in the curation of panels being more diverse in terms of gender balance, in terms of ethnic diversity. We also need to have that better curation of panels in terms of products and innovation and voices and communities that are driving change. I mean, I think that the this particular industry, in terms of the developer community, which is often open source, and individual practitioners, do we call them practitioners, individual technologists, people who are making changes in, you know, within their personal practice rather than in a company structure, they need to be heard too, because they're the driving force behind it.
I'm going to jot that idea down for our next symposium. That's a great idea. Dan, I see you've got your hand raised. Did you want to contribute something?
Yeah, I think Mary Alice kind of covered what I wanted to kind of say as well. But I think, it's the kind of makeup of the panel and what kind of topics you're going to cover. Myself, Tim, and Adil, we're kind of product-y people, right? Product management or product design. I was at NobCon in Chicago
nice.
recently, and you get a lot of very small one-person businesses there who are making new modular synthesizers, and they're very unique. And I think it kind of depends on the makeup of the panel and who you're talking to and what you're talking about. I know at ADC recently, Jason ran a panel, and we had people like Harry Morley from Focusrite, who's a software developer. The more we talk about getting into those kind of topics, the actual building, maybe that will encourage more of those kind of independent, solo or small businesses to come along and talk on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, Jay, let me bring the microphone over. It is actually quite a long cable, isn't it? Okay.
No, it's a very long cable.
Yeah.
Kind of a question, kind of also just to flag that all of the topics that have come up in the last quarter of an hour, I guess, resonate very, very strongly with what I think I've spoken to each of you about individually at some point over the last year, which is Sound Without Sight as a platform for sharing information, specifically around accessibility, bridging those gaps between developers, companies, and the community, the end users of accessible products, and also potentially building bridges between companies to encourage kind of sharing of information in these areas. I guess I don't want to kind of spring a question on anyone in particular, but I guess just to flag that if there's anything that can be done to enable that, then I'm more than happy to have a conversation.
Great, thanks very much, Jay. And I'll certainly put everyone in touch if you're not in touch already afterwards. Sorry, thank you. Hi, Maya, sorry I missed you there.
Hi, I have a question particularly about Ableton, because that can also sound like a complaint, but it's more of a curiosity. Like, I've heard about Ableton being present in different places, in different conferences regarding accessibility, and now we are here at this symposium, and we've heard about Ableton as well. And as far as we know, for that moment, Ableton is completely inaccessible for us. So my question is how, like, first, is there any progress already made, or we still are on the conversation side of development, let's say? And for example, my second part of my question is, what do you think do you think that we can expect Ableton to go maybe in the direction that Native Instruments or Arturia went, to be able to make a main controller for Ableton more accessible for us? Because I think there could be a technology and it could be done, and I don't know if I'm right.
Thanks, Maya. It's a really, really good question. Amy.
Yes, thank you for the question. And yes, we've been present for the last few years in spaces like this one, because we started research about 2 years ago into making things accessible at Ableton. So it's been a project that's been ongoing. And as Scott mentioned, when open source, things can be like leaps and bounds ahead, because you're not necessarily managing being able to fit things into the product and production and everything that you have to manage to do with that. And so people can, as a one single developer, can go ahead, make a change and publish it, and it can be in the code base really, really quickly. We are working on accessibility for our main products. So that is something that is happening now. And I am actually really open to Alex sharing my details today for anybody that would perhaps like to come and be part of that process and do some testing with us and get engaged with some of the products that Ableton offer. So for those of you who haven't heard of Ableton before, we have a digital audio workstation software called Live, which is used a lot by electronic music producers. And we also have some hardware controllers. We have the Push 2, and we've just recently released an app-based product called Notes. So there are some things that we are really looking to get fast forward on the accessibility front. In terms of the question about hardware controllers, that I have been hired into the company and my role is accessibility specialist. So we're not going to forget about accessibility anytime soon, and not if I can help it anyway. And it's going to be something that we'll be working into everything. And at the moment, I've actually only been at the company less than a month as we're speaking right now. So I'm still learning the lay of the land and where everybody's at in terms of how much they've been trying to do with their accessibility work. And I've been really pleasantly surprised, and I'm really looking forward to what's on the horizon for us. And I can't commit to when things will be released and dates and things like that at the moment. It's all still very new to me as well. But there is a lot of enthusiasm for the topic internally. As was being said before, as Dan said about having channels internally where a lot of people are connecting on this topic, that's happening at Ableton too. And there is a lot of people that care about this and care about individual experiences. And that's what we've been doing a lot of research towards as well. So yeah, it's a watch this space kind of point to make, and I don't like making those because it's, I know that we hear a lot of those at events like these, but there is stuff that is happening and we are working on that. So please do get in touch with me if you would like to be part of that process and do testing and work towards using Ableton products in an accessible way. We're really excited that we can start doing that.
That's great, thanks, Amy. And we've actually had a comment in the chat just to say that accessibility is a feature that some people are looking for when they're purchasing products. So yeah, thanks very much to Nick for mentioning that. We've got probably time for one more question from Brian.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering, from the point of view of a kind of consumer wanting to get more into this, what do the panel think is the role of industry in sort of publicizing their accessibility credentials and providing support and sort of training for people who want to get into using their products, from a visual impairment point of view? Is that part of the role that they see for the industry, or is that is that support and publicity about accessibility something more for the community? What's the position?
Thanks, Brian. I think Adil like to respond to that.
Very, very good question and very relevant topic as we are getting prepared to release Machina Accessibility. Machina being the control device on the Large Hadron Collider, or so yeah, very pertinent. I think I'll take this in two parts. So one is what's the role of the company in terms of kind of disclaiming and disseminating information. I think the company must take ownership of that for its own good. This is something we've learnt the hard way. All I'm going to say is Scott Chesworth. So, I mean, maybe just to cut a long story short, I think it's very important for us to say what we haven't done as well as what we have done so that we can manage expectations accordingly. It's great that we talk about complete control. It's great that we talk about NKS. It's great about how we talk about any of these instruments that are released with NKS are accessible to our hardware. But I think what Scott really wants to know is if Guitar Rig is accessible. And if that isn't explicitly stated anywhere on our website or in our manuals or in our community posts, as in the posts that we manage and that we have oversight of, then it's not really helping anybody. So that's the sort of thing that we need to take close control of and make sure all of the awareness is there. So it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will. In terms of the other half of the question, so how much responsibility should we take for making sure the products are kind of suitable for use, and do we just ship it and then kind of hope everybody does the best they can, or do we get involved there? There are two terms that we use a lot in product management, product development. Those are out-of-the-box experience and end-to-end customer experience. And I believe very strongly that as people that create products, we need to take full responsibility and accountability for every step of the way. That's not just the thing turns on when you connect it to power. That's not just the thing turns on and talks to your computer when the USB cable is plugged in. That's also the packaging is sensible and you don't get paper cuts when you try to open the box. That is also, you have a serial number that's not 150 letters long that you need to type in manually. That is, the customer manual isn't 750 pages long, and the Machina Mark II manual is 750 pages long, which is why I still don't know how to use it. Mark III even, yeah. So, it's things like, are there video tutorials that can really help a customer hit the ground running? It's things like, are there quick start guides to give somebody the kind of ins and outs of it? It's things like, is there a training mode or is there a tour mode? So that rather than having to figure things out the hard way by trial and error, they can just get a quick overview of what's happening. So, yes, I absolutely do feel that it's the company's responsibility to get this right. I'm sorry to take this on. No, I don't feel anybody has the recipe for success or knows how to get it right yet. That's the part that is trial and error. So with Machina Mark III, shameless plug here, we're introducing this thing called a tool mode. So Machina has 1,000 buttons on it. 1,001 buttons on it, thanks, Andre. The only person that has memorized the full layout of Machina Mark III is Jason. Nobody else knows the full layout of Machina, only Jason. Even I don't. The tool mode is there to help orient you. The tool mode is there to help you figure out what these clusters are. You can figure out that the Machina has this kind of layout of grid in the bottom right corner, screen on top, and a whole load of buttons on the left with some knobs underneath the screens. That's something that you can physically, with your sense of touch, work your way around. What do you do from there? Do you have to go through a manual and look up knob for section 2, or is there a lightweight application that you can just hop in and hop out of to hop around? Sorry for using hop so much there. So it's things like that. Yes, I think it's our responsibility. I think we're learning, and I think it's a space where there's lots of room for, working with customers, trying to figure out what does work, what doesn't work, user testing, having conversations, and trying to learn more as we go along and growing.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just a quick add to that. I think there's another angle as well. I mean, plus one to all of that, of course, which is the reality that, speaking, for example, for Native Instruments products, people use them inside Ableton, or they use them inside Pro Tools, or wherever. Often they'll have a Focusrite audio interface, maybe some Arturia instruments, whatever it might be, but people don't work with one vendor. That's something that, at least I haven't figured out yet, but it's something that I think is another topic, is how can we make sure that we're thinking about those bridges and communicating those bridges between these products that people use to make music, because at the end of the day, that's part of the exciting thing about it, is using things from different places and using products from different places. So that's a challenge for us, I think, but not one that we've solved yet, or certainly we, speaking for Native Instruments, have solved yet.
Well, that's where the community comes in, right? Because they're the use cases. This is how I use your product, and I combine it with this one, and I do a bit of that. I mean, that absolutely, to Jay's question about, the objectives of the Sound Without Sight platform, that community that you're going to grow, that are going to provide content for you to showcase the usage of the product. It's so important, people need to see how someone else has done it in order to go, maybe I could, maybe that's for me.